Uh, so Tudo was talking about Exodus. There's a hum. You can mute it until I get to the video. And so I was thinking about Exodus, and we were talking about spiritual growth, and I just thought there's a time maybe when we're first on fire for the Lord. There's a time when our walk with God is sort of like the Exodus, where God seems to be maybe present in a more visible way. In the Exodus, you have God showing up for the plagues and taking down Pharaoh. You have God showing up for crossing the Red Sea. God showing up to teach His word at the mountain, and then later on, God showing up in the Joshua, but the walls of Jericho coming down, and in Judges with Gideon overcoming a vast army, and it's like God showing up all the time. And then at some point you get to the book of Esther, and where's God? Never even mentioned in the book of Esther. Have you ever had that moment in your life, or a time of your life, or a period of your life? Have you gone through a season where it just wasn't like the Exodus? It wasn't like all that newness. It wasn't like all that wow God stuff. And then it became like, well, where is God? Where are you? Are you going to show up? Anybody ever been there? This is normal. This is the walk of faith we have, and there are different reasons for it. And so I want to discuss some of those today. There's a story about a older married couple. I think I heard in Bible class that today is the 56th wedding anniversary. Is it today for John and Linda Free? Is that right? Is it 56? Is that it? 57. I heard it was the 57th wedding anniversary. So that's amazing. So this couple was older than them and married longer. But they like to have a Sunday afternoon drive. That's something people used to do before the internet and maybe before TV. Just have a nice Sunday afternoon drive and the rolling hills and the beautiful trees, the colors of the fields, and they would drive. They did this for all these years, and now later in their years, they're one Sunday afternoon they're driving along, and the woman looks over to her husband and says, "I've really loved these drives, and I just remember back when we were younger, and oh, it was so wonderful. I felt so close to you, and you'd put your arm around me, and I'd lay my head on your shoulder, and I really miss those times." And the man driving after a moment said, "Well, I haven't moved." So one of the reasons why we might not feel as close to God, one reason, the obvious, and we actually talked about it a couple weeks ago, obvious reason is that, maybe we've moved. Maybe we're not spending as much time talking to God. Maybe we're not spending as much time reading in His Word and meditating on His Word day and night and on His laws, like David says. Maybe we're not walking in the steps of Jesus as much as we once did in service and in offering ourselves to others and lifting others up, and just maybe we're not doing as much of that, and so we're feeling a distance from God. We're feeling that absence because we've moved over time. That happens, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about passion, and that's the passage in Revelation talking about the Laodiceans. I can't say it now. The Laodiceans, where Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." You remember that? "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And this week in my readings, I just noticed, and I don't think I've seen this before, it just struck me, I think that the reference, the imagery there of Jesus standing at the door knocking, and we're in there and we need to decide, do we want to let Him in or not? And really, I told you that was to the Laodicean church. It's really to us, to those who are His people. Do we want Him in our lives? The imagery, I think, is actually from the Song of Songs. It used to be called Song of Solomon. Somebody changed it. But anyway, it's different names. But you know the book, right? Song of Solomon. Some people wonder why that's in the Bible, right? I mean, whoa, it's a love story. But anyway, there's an imagery in there about this beloved woman who just so passionately loves her beloved, and she just wants nothing more than to see him. And it looks to me like she's having a nightmare. You ever have a nightmare that like whatever's on your heart that's really, really important just kind of goes wrong? Like you're supposed to catch a flight for some important thing, like, a huge job interview, or maybe, your first great vacation, or something, and then you have these dreams like you missed it. Anybody ever have something like that? Something really important, and your nightmare is that you somehow failed that. I've had a recurring dream sometimes, and I know I'm not the only preacher that has it, because I've heard preachers talk about it. But there's a dream where it's Sunday morning, church is about to start, or it has already started, and I find myself completely unprepared. Somehow, I don't know what happened to the week, I have nothing to say, and I don't know how I'm going to get something to say in the time when I have to get up in front of everybody, and somehow I forgot to get dressed. I'm not the only one who has that, but why does it happen? It happens because I'm passionate about preaching the Word of God. It's very important to me. Ever since I feel like God called me to do it, I take it with huge responsibility, and I want to be true to God, and I want to be true to bringing you something from His Word, and so it means a lot to me, and so I think once in a while I have these nightmares, like, oh no, what happened to the week, and what did I do? But I see this in this text, I see it, and I just want to throw that out in the Song of Solomon here in chapter 5. Look at what's going on here. She opens up with, I slept, but my heart was awake. What is that? Well, isn't that a dream? I don't know how else to take that. I was sleeping, but my heart was awake. So there's some dream going on here. And it says, a sound, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my treasure, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. And she says, I had put off my garment. How could I put it on? I bathed my feet. How could I soil them? What? You understand? She desperately wants him to visit. She can't wait to see him. But somehow, oh wait, he's here, but I can't see him because, I don't have my robe on. Well, put it on. Oh, I already washed my feet. Well, you can wash them again. Right? But this is how these nightmares go. It's like for silly reasons, we're going to miss something important. And so, my beloved put his hand to the latch, and my heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers lit with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. And so, desperately, she wants to see him, but silly things somehow prevented her. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer. So she missed it, right? And it goes on, and she goes out in the streets looking for him, and she gets beat up for being out in the streets. And it's definitely a nightmare. It's not a nice dream. But the worst part of the nightmare is she desperately wanted to see him, and somehow these silly things got in the way of opening the door and letting him in. You get it? And so what a great imagery to come into Revelation to say to the church, are you going to let silly worldly things that you've set your minds on, are you going to let those things stop you from inviting Jesus into your life and letting him become the center of your life? And so that's one reason why we might become lukewarm, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. One reason. But there are other things going on too, other reasons. Anybody, if you had little kids, did you do this with your kids with the thing on the wall? I think we did it for a while with the wall marks and the kids growing up. Or maybe you did it when you were a kid. I never got much out of those things. Some people did better than I did. But you start with these marks, right? And you're growing up. And I love this graphic because where's this girl's eyes looking? They're looking up. That's what we want, right? In spiritual growth, we should be looking up. We should be like her, just looking. And little kids want this, right? They want to be as big as their older brother or sister. They want to be as big as their mom or dad, right? Or as their friend. They just want to get bigger and grow up. And we should want this spiritually, right? But this only goes so far before this kind of growth stops. Isn't that right? And then what's up here? Like, it seems like there's nothing left. It's like all that Exodus stuff happens down here. And then what? Is there anything left? And we find ourselves in the book of Esther. Like, there's nothing more? But the answer is there is something more, because we know this little girl, as she grows up, even if she stops growing in height, she's going to continue growing emotionally. Her brain's going to keep developing. She's going to continue to grow as a person, right? I mean, that's the nature of life. And it's the same thing with our spirituality. Our spirituality, maybe at first there's kind of this Exodus excitement and we have all these things going on. And then we might hit sort of what this Carmelite monk, this Spanish monk named St. John of the Cross, what he called the dark night of the soul in a poem. He just talked about a time when we sort of hit a wall and there's an emptiness about, hey, God, where are you? And he says it's not a bad thing necessarily. He says opportunity to grow. And for many people, it comes because our relationship with God is going through a transition. If you think about it, that early Exodus period is sort of all about me, isn't it? I got delivered from bondage. I was able to cross the Red Sea into new land. I received God's law at the mountain. I was able to tear down those walls at Jericho. Or God did it in my life for me, right? God loved me. He saved me. He forgave me. He prepared a place for me. Yay, right? That's one level. That's one kind of spirituality. But something happens when your focus gets off of me or yourself and you start loving and serving God no longer because of me, but because of who He is. Does that make sense? You start seeing who He is and wanting to serve Him because of who He is. And what happens when people reach this point and they're no longer just kind of looking at what's in it for me, what happens when you start thinking about who God is and what He's doing, and you start aligning yourself with His kingdom, you start seeing what He sees. And it's not always pretty. And it can be very depressing. And there was many examples. I chose a few examples. I have to say done, okay? Well, let me throw that out. If you're feeling far away from God because you're not opening the door, James wants you to know, draw near to God and He'll draw near to you. Sorry about that. But this right here, a couple of examples of this kind of dark night or this, hey, God, where'd you go thing. Charles Spurgeon often refers to as the Prince of Preachers, was so plagued by discouragement and depression that it is said he tendered his resignation 32 times in 39 years. And this guy was like the preacher like 100 years ago, right? But he's just, I got to quit. It can be discouraging. William Carey, the father of the modern mission movement, was faithful to the call of God. He persevered in spite of all the hardships he encountered. He never let anything stop him. As one writer said, he was no more deterred by tragedies than a locomotive by butterflies. Yet there were times when he suffered what one biographer called sheer black depression. Now, this is happening not because these guys have decided not to be faithful to God or kind of, got lukewarm. They're still very passionate, but they're finding themselves hitting this kind of wall. In 1959, and this came out in these writings of Mother Teresa, she wrote, in my soul, I feel just that terrible pain of loss, of God not wanting me, of God not being God, of God not existing. This inner turmoil, known only by a handful of her closest colleagues, lasted until her death in 1997. Mother Teresa, offering herself daily to the poorest and the sickest, wrestled often with this, where are you, God? Where are you? Where have you gone? What are you doing? Now, it wasn't her only testimony. It was just a real experience of living for the kingdom of God. And so what do we do with that? What happens when the Exodus kind of faith we had turns into the book of Esther? And we're like, well, where are you, God? Are you still here? So what I want to leave you with is this text from Proverbs, because that's the whole message of this book of Esther. The message is to be able to trust God. And so Proverbs says, and this should be written on your heart and thought about every day, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. And that's what we all need. Even through the darkest times, the toughest times, we've got to continue to trust God. He hasn't stopped. He's still doing His thing. It may not look like Exodus. It may look like Esther. But that's what it is to walk with the Lord. Okay?